It was supposed to be just another high society wedding. But when a wealthy man showed up with an unexpected guest, a homeless woman, no one could have predicted the impact it would have. What started as a simple act of kindness quickly spiraled into something far more meaningful. And by the end of the night, everyone at the wedding was talking about the one guest who didn't belong, or so they thought. Before we jump into today's story, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments. Be sure to subscribe because you won't want to miss the special story we have for you tomorrow. Daniel sat in his luxurious penthouse, staring at the wedding invitation in his hand. His ex-fiancée, Claire, was getting married, and the news hit him harder than he expected. Nearly a year had passed since she left him, and despite the time, the pain of their breakup still felt raw. Claire had always complained that Daniel was too focused on work, too obsessed with his business to make time for her. In the end, she had walked out, leaving him to wonder if all his success had been worth the price of losing her. The elegant invitation, embossed with gold lettering, only made it worse. She was marrying someone else now. Michael. Daniel grimaced at the name, hating how foreign it sounded next to hers. He imagined Claire in her wedding dress, smiling at Michael the way she once smiled at him. The thought made his chest tighten with bitterness. Attending the wedding felt like torture, but not going would raise more questions than it would answer. Claire and Daniel still moved in the same social circles, and skipping the event would only add fuel to the rumors that he was still heartbroken over her. But the idea of showing up alone, watching Claire start a new life with another man, that was unbearable. Needing to clear his head, Daniel grabbed his coat and headed out into the cool autumn air. The busy streets of the city buzzed with life as people rushed past him, all absorbed in their own worlds. Normally, the energy of the city helped him escape his thoughts, but today it did little to lift his mood. He walked aimlessly, his mind replaying old arguments with Claire. He had always told himself that building his business was for them, for their future. But now he wondered if it had just been an excuse. As he turned down a quiet side street, his gaze landed on a woman sitting on the ground near the entrance of a small cafe. She was sitting still, unlike the people bustling around her, and for some reason, Daniel found himself stopping. The woman's clothes were worn, her hair untidy, but she sat with a quiet dignity that struck him. She wasn't begging for change or calling out for help. Instead, she simply watched the world go by, her face calm, almost serene. Daniel stood there for a moment, unsure of why he felt so compelled to approach her. Maybe it was the look on her face, peaceful, despite her circumstances. "Hi," Daniel said, walking over before he could talk himself out of it. The woman looked up, surprised by the interruption. Her brown eyes were warm but cautious. "Hello," she replied softly. "I'm Daniel," he said, feeling a little awkward. "I'm Amira," the woman responded, eyeing him curiously. There was a brief pause as Daniel tried to figure out why he had even approached her in the first place. He wasn't the type to randomly strike up conversations with strangers, especially not someone sitting on the street. But something about Amira intrigued him. There was a strength in her presence that he couldn't quite explain. "I don't know why I stopped," Daniel admitted, feeling a little ridiculous. "But you just seemed, I don't know, different." Amira smiled, though it was faint. "Most people don't bother stopping. They just walk on by." "I guess I'm not most people," Daniel said, his smile growing a little. Amira studied him for a moment, then nodded. "No, I suppose you're not." They continued talking, their conversation easy and natural, despite the vast differences in their lives. Amira explained how she had once been a teacher, but after a series of unfortunate events, she had lost everything: her job, her home, her family. Despite everything, there was no bitterness in her voice. She spoke with a quiet resilience, as if she had accepted her circumstances, but hadn't given up hope. Daniel found himself drawn to her story. He had met countless people in his life, many of them powerful and successful, but few had the kind of strength he saw in Amira. Her life had been hard, yet she still held on to a sense of grace that he found both humbling and admirable. Then, without thinking, Daniel asked, "Would you like to come to a wedding with me?" Amira blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "A wedding?" "Yeah," Daniel nodded, surprised at himself for asking. "My ex is getting married this weekend, and I don't want to go alone. I could use some company, and I think you could use a break from, well, this." Amira looked at him as if he were joking, but when she saw that he wasn't, she frowned. "Why me? You don't even know me." "I don't know," Daniel shrugged. "Maybe that's why. I think you deserve a day to feel special. And honestly, I could use the company." Amira hesitated, her eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick. "You really want me to go to your ex's wedding with you? Just like that?" Yeah, Daniel said, suddenly more sure of the idea. I'll get you a dress. Make sure you're comfortable. It'll just be a day where we don't have to think about everything else. What do you say? Amira stared at him for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she let out a soft laugh. All right, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. I'll go. Daniel smiled, relieved. Really? Amira nodded, still smiling. Why not? I could use an adventure. And just like that, a simple conversation on the street turned into something far bigger. Neither of them knew it yet, but this decision would change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The next morning, Daniel wasted no time in preparing for the wedding. He hadn't anticipated how complicated it would be to bring a guest who needed a complete transformation, but he was determined to make sure Amira felt comfortable and confident. First things first, he arranged for them to visit one of the city's most exclusive boutiques, a place where even he rarely shopped, unless it was for a special occasion. They arrived at the boutique, its grand exterior polished to perfection, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing elegant gowns and sparkling jewelry. Amira hesitated for a moment at the entrance, clearly feeling out of place. Her worn clothes and unkempt hair stood in stark contrast to the pristine environment inside. But Daniel gently encouraged her to walk in, assuring her that this was all part of the plan. As they stepped inside, Amira's eyes widened at the sight of the luxurious surroundings. Racks of designer dresses in every color imaginable lined the walls, while polished mirrors and soft lighting gave the space an almost dreamlike quality. She looked at Daniel, uncertainty etched across her face. I don't think I belong here, Amira said softly, her voice barely audible above the faint music playing in the background. Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. You belong here just as much as anyone else. Trust me. Amira nodded, though it was clear she wasn't fully convinced. As they approached the sales staff, Daniel could see the way their eyes flicked over Amira's appearance, taking in her worn shoes, her oversized coat, her tangled hair. There was a brief moment of hesitation before one of the women, a tall, impeccably dressed saleswoman, stepped forward to greet them. Good afternoon, she said with a practiced smile. How can we help you today? Daniel didn't miss the way her eyes darted back to Amira, but he remained unfazed. We're here to find her a dress for an event this weekend, he said, his tone casual but firm. Something elegant. Money isn't an issue. The woman's demeanor shifted immediately. Of course, she said, her smile widening as she gestured toward the rows of dresses. We have a beautiful selection. Let's find something perfect for you. Amira's discomfort was obvious as the sales staff began pulling dresses from the racks, their polished nails flicking through hangers with practiced precision. She stood stiffly, unsure of what to do with herself. But Daniel stayed close by, offering quiet encouragement. The staff began bringing out various options: a floor-length gown in emerald green, a sleek black dress with delicate lace detailing, a royal blue gown with a flowing skirt. Amira tried them on one by one, emerging from the fitting room each time with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Each dress seemed more beautiful than the last, but there was a hesitancy in her eyes that Daniel couldn't ignore. Eventually, they brought out a dress that stopped Amira in her tracks. It was a deep crimson gown with a sweetheart neckline, the fabric flowing effortlessly down to the floor. The material shimmered faintly under the light, and the cut of the dress was both elegant and timeless. Amira's breath caught as she stared at it. This one, she whispered, almost as if she were afraid to speak too loudly. The saleswoman smiled knowingly. An excellent choice, she said, already picturing the commission she would earn from the sale. Amira disappeared into the fitting room once again, and when she stepped out this time, Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. The transformation was remarkable. The gown hugged her in all the right places, accentuating her graceful figure, while the rich color complemented her dark skin beautifully. Her tangled hair had been pulled back into a simple but elegant updo, and the makeup artist the boutique had on hand had given her a soft, natural look that brought out her eyes. Amira looked at herself in the mirror, her expression one of disbelief. She lifted a hand to touch the fabric of the dress, as if to make sure it was real. Is that really me? She asked, quietly, her voice filled with wonder. Daniel, standing behind her, met her gaze in the mirror. That's you, he said with a smile. You look incredible. Amira's eyes welled up slightly, though she blinked back the tears before they could fall. I don't even recognize myself. Maybe that's a good thing, Daniel said gently. Sometimes it's nice to be reminded of how much potential we have, even when life tries to make us forget. Amira turned to him, her expression softening. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with sincerity. I don't think anyone's ever done something like this for me before. Daniel shrugged, though he felt a deep sense of satisfaction at seeing her so happy. You deserve it. They left the boutique a few hours later, Amira's dress carefully packed and ready for the big day. As they walked down the street, Daniel couldn't help but notice the way people looked at them. Some curious, some judgmental, others simply indifferent. But Amira walked with her head held a little higher than before, her confidence growing with every step. I feel like I'm dreaming, she admitted as they made their way toward a small cafe to grab a late lunch. Daniel smiled. Trust me, it's real, and you're going to look amazing at that wedding. Amira laughed, a soft, genuine sound that Daniel realized he hadn't heard from her until now. I'm not sure what I'll say to people, though. I mean, your ex-fiancé is going to be there. That's a little intimidating. Daniel chuckled. Just be yourself. You've got more to offer than most of the people who will be there. Believe me, Amira didn't seem entirely convinced, but she smiled anyway. If you say so. As they sat down at the cafe, enjoying the warm afternoon sun, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation for the weekend. It had started as a strange impulse, a way to avoid feeling lonely at his ex's wedding. But now he realized there was something about Amira that intrigued him on a deeper level. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met, and her presence was already making him rethink certain aspects of his life. Little did either of them know, the wedding would be just the beginning of a journey that neither could have anticipated. As the days passed and the wedding drew closer, Daniel found himself more excited about the event than he had anticipated. It wasn't just because he would see Claire again, something he had been dreading. It was because of Amira. There was something about her that grounded him, made him feel more at ease. Her outlook on life, despite all the hardships she had endured, was refreshing in a way that Daniel hadn't expected. The morning of the wedding arrived, and Daniel felt a sense of nervousness creeping in. He had gotten so used to his high society lifestyle that it was easy to forget how intimidating events like this could be, especially for someone like Amira, who hadn't been a part of that world for a long time, if ever. He called her to make sure everything was going smoothly. Are you all set? Daniel asked, his voice casual, but his nerves betraying him. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Amira answered. I'm just about ready, she said, but I have to admit I'm a little nervous. Daniel smiled, though she couldn't see it. Don't be. You're going to be the most stunning person there. Just enjoy yourself. This day is as much for you as it is for me. Amira let out a soft laugh. I don't know about that, but I'll try. They agreed to meet at his apartment, where they would leave together for the wedding. When the doorbell rang a little while later, Daniel's heart raced with anticipation. He opened the door, and there she stood, Amira, dressed in the crimson gown that had captivated her at the boutique. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup soft and subtle, and her expression one of nervous excitement. Daniel stared at her for a moment, speechless. Wow, he finally managed to say, his voice a little breathless. You look incredible. Amira blushed slightly, ducking her head. Thank you. It still feels a little strange, but I guess I'll get used to it. You don't need to get used to it, Daniel said, offering his arm. You just need to enjoy it. Amira smiled, accepting his arm as they made their way to the waiting car. The driver held the door open for them, and soon they were on their way to the wedding. The city blurred past them as they rode in silence, the weight of the upcoming event settling over them both. For Daniel, this wedding represented closure, whether he was ready for it or not. For Amira, it was something entirely different, a step into a world she had only glimpsed from the outside. When they arrived at the wedding venue, an elegant estate on the outskirts of the city, Daniel felt the familiar surge of anxiety. The sprawling grounds were filled with guests, all dressed in their finest attire, and the sight of it made his stomach twist. But then he glanced at Amira, who was looking out the window with wide eyes, and his nerves seemed to settle. She was the one who should feel out of place, but instead she seemed almost calm. Ready? Daniel asked as the car came to a stop. Amira took a deep breath, then nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. They stepped out of the car and onto the long driveway leading up to the estate. The soft murmur of conversation floated through the air as guests mingled, their laughter and chatter mingling with the sounds of the live orchestra playing in the background. Daniel felt eyes on them almost immediately, curious stares, judgmental glances. But he ignored them, focusing instead on the woman beside him. Amira walked with quiet grace, her head held high despite the attention they were drawing. Daniel could tell that some of the guests were whispering, trying to figure out who she was and why she was with him. After all, Daniel was well known in these circles, and he hadn't been seen with anyone since Claire. But Amira didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't let it bother her. As they made their way through the crowd, Daniel felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see an old friend, Thomas, standing behind him with a wide grin on his face. "Daniel!" Thomas exclaimed, clapping him on the back. "I wasn't sure if you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss it," Daniel replied, though his voice was more strained than he intended. Thomas's eyes shifted to Amira, and he raised an eyebrow in surprise. "And who is this lovely lady?" Daniel smiled, his discomfort easing slightly. "This is Amira," he said proudly. "She's my guest for the evening." Amira offered a polite smile, but Daniel could see the flicker of discomfort in her eyes as Thomas looked her over. "Pleasure to meet you, Amira," Thomas said, though his tone was slightly condescending. "You must be new to the city?" Amira hesitated, unsure of how to respond, but Daniel stepped in smoothly. "Amira and I met recently," he said, his voice casual but firm. "She's a special person, and I wanted her to share this evening with me." Thomas blinked, clearly taken aback by Daniel's response. "Of course," he said quickly, his smile faltering. "Well, enjoy the evening." With that, Thomas excused himself, leaving Daniel and Amira to continue on their way. Daniel felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him, and he glanced at Amira, who was looking down at her feet. "You okay?" Daniel asked gently. Amira nodded, though her smile was faint. "It's just strange. I don't belong here, Daniel." Daniel frowned. "Of course you do. You belong wherever you want to be. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Amira met his gaze, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just don't want to embarrass you." "You're not," Daniel assured her. "You're amazing, and if anyone doesn't see that, it's their problem, not yours." Amira smiled again, this time more genuinely. "All right, I'll try to believe that." They continued through the crowd, making their way toward the reception hall. As they entered the grand space, Daniel spotted Claire at the far end of the room, greeting guests with her new husband, Michael. His chest tightened as he watched her, her white dress gleaming under the soft lighting. She looked beautiful, just as he had expected, but there was something about the way she glanced around the room that made Daniel wonder if she was truly happy. As if sensing his gaze, Claire's eyes shifted toward him. The moment she saw him standing there with Amira, her smile faltered, just for a second, before she quickly regained her composure. But in that brief moment, Daniel saw something flicker in her expression. Surprise, maybe even a hint of jealousy. Daniel turned to Amira and offered her his arm once more. "Shall we?" Amira hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Let's do this." Daniel and Amira made their way deeper into the reception hall, the soft clinking of glasses and low murmur of voices surrounding them. The grandeur of the venue was undeniable. Tall marble columns, glittering chandeliers, and tables adorned with the finest floral arrangements. It was everything one would expect from a wedding of this scale. But Daniel felt detached from it all. The lavish setting, the polished guests, even the grand orchestra playing softly in the background. It felt like a different world now, one he was no longer part of. As they moved through the crowd, Daniel noticed the subtle stares aimed at Amira. Guests whispered behind their champagne flutes, curious glances flicking between the two of them. He had known it would happen, but seeing it unfold in real time was harder to ignore than he thought. But Amira, to his surprise, remained composed, walking beside him with quiet dignity. They were only a few steps away from Claire and Michael when one of the older women in the crowd, Mrs. Harrington, intercepted them. She was one of the city's socialites, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper gaze. Her eyes landed on Amira first, taking in her appearance, before finally addressing Daniel. "Daniel, darling," Mrs. Harrington exclaimed with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's been ages. I didn't think you'd make it to this little celebration." Daniel smiled politely, though he could sense what was coming. "I wouldn't miss it," he said, his tone measured. "It's good to see you." Her attention turned to Amira, her expression flickering with intrigue. "And who is this lovely young woman?" "This is Amira," Daniel replied confidently, introducing her with pride. "She's my guest tonight." Amira gave a polite nod, her expression reserved. Mrs. Harrington's smile tightened as she gave Amira an appraising look. "Oh, how delightful," she said, though the undertone of surprise was unmistakable. "Well, I do hope you enjoy yourself, dear." Amira smiled politely, though it was clear she felt the scrutiny. "Thank you." Mrs. Harrington lingered for a moment longer, clearly trying to piece together the dynamic between Daniel and Amira. But sensing there was little more to be gleaned, she finally excused herself, leaving them alone once more. Daniel glanced at Amira, worried that the brief interaction had unsettled her. "You okay?" Amira nodded, though her shoulders were a little tense. "It's fine. I knew people would stare." You're handling it better than most people I know, Daniel said with a small smile. You're doing great. She gave him a grateful smile, though Daniel could tell she was still processing everything. Thanks, but it's strange. This world, it's so different from what I know. I know, Daniel admitted, but you're doing better than most of these people who've lived in it their whole lives. They reached the far end of the room, where Claire and Michael were greeting guests. As they approached, Claire caught sight of Daniel once more, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the sight of Amira at his side. For a split second, her expression faltered, but she quickly recovered, smiling graciously as they stepped closer. Daniel, Claire greeted, her voice warm but with an undercurrent of tension. I didn't expect you to make it. Daniel returned her smile, though he could feel the weight of the moment between them. I wouldn't miss it. Her gaze shifted to Amira, and the tension became palpable. And this is? This is Amira, Daniel said, his voice even. She's my guest. Claire hesitated for a moment, her eyes lingering on Amira. It's nice to meet you, she said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Amira nodded, her tone polite. You too, congratulations on your wedding. Thank you, Claire replied, her gaze flicking briefly back to Daniel before focusing on Amira again. I hope you enjoy the evening. The exchange was brief, but the unspoken tension hung in the air even after they had moved on. Daniel could feel the weight of Claire's gaze on them as they walked away, but he didn't look back. Amira let out a small breath as they moved into the next part of the reception area. That was awkward. Yeah, Daniel said with a soft laugh. Sorry about that. It's not your fault, Amira said, shaking her head. It's just weird. I didn't expect it to feel like this. Daniel paused, turning to face her. Are you okay? If this is too much, we can leave any time. Amira considered his offer for a moment, but then she shook her head. No, I'm fine. I just need to get used to it. Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. You're doing better than I ever did in these situations. They found a table near the edge of the room, away from the center of attention, where they could sit and talk quietly. As they settled into their chairs, and Amira's gaze drifted over the crowd, watching as the guests laughed, chatted, and danced. There was a faraway look in her eyes, one that Daniel had come to recognize in her, like she was seeing another world, one she was no longer part of. What are you thinking about? Daniel asked, his voice soft. Amira blinked, pulling herself back to the present. Just how strange all of this is, she admitted. A few days ago, I was sitting on a street corner, wondering how I'd get through the next day. And now I'm here, in this dress, surrounded by all these people. It doesn't feel real. Daniel watched her, his expression thoughtful. You deserve to be here just as much as anyone else, he said quietly. Maybe even more. Amira smiled faintly. It's just hard to believe sometimes. They sat in silence for a few moments, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Daniel's mind drifted back to Claire and the way she had looked at him when she saw him with Amira. There had been something in her eyes, something more than just surprise. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like he was starting to close the door on that chapter of his life. He wasn't sure where this new path with Amira would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. It felt right. The soft strains of music began to fill the air, and Daniel noticed that the orchestra had started playing a slow, romantic tune. He turned to Amira, a playful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Do you want to dance? He asked, holding out his hand. Amira blinked, caught off guard by the offer. Me? Dance? Why not? Daniel said, still smiling. We're at a wedding, after all. Amira hesitated, glancing at the dance floor, where several couples were already swaying to the music. I'm not sure I'm much of a dancer, she said, her voice filled with doubt. Daniel chuckled. Neither am I, but we'll figure it out together. After a moment of indecision, Amira smiled and placed her hand in his. All right, let's give it a shot. They made their way to the dance floor, the soft glow of the chandeliers casting a warm light over them. As Daniel placed his hand on Amira's waist and they began to move to the music, he felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over him. The chaos of the wedding, the whispers, the stares, it all faded away. In that moment, it was just the two of them, swaying gently to the music, lost in their own little world. For Amira, the sensation was surreal. She had never imagined herself in a setting like this, much less dancing with someone like Daniel. But as they moved together, she found herself relaxing, the weight of her insecurities slipping away. She wasn't just the woman from the street corner anymore. She was someone who belonged, someone who was being seen for the first time in a long time. Neither of them said anything as they danced, but the silence between them felt comfortable. It was as if the music was speaking for them, expressing all the things they didn't need to say out loud. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the chandeliers, they both realized that something had shifted between them, something that neither of them had expected. As the slow dance continued, Daniel felt as though time had slowed with it. The soft music, the gentle sway of their movements, the warmth of Amira's hand in his, all of it created a bubble of calm that was a stark contrast to the nervous energy he had felt earlier. The people around them faded into the background, their whispers and curious glances becoming white noise. Amira, too, seemed to lose herself in the moment. She had been tense when they first stepped onto the dance floor, but as the minutes passed, she began to relax. Her body moved with more ease, her shoulders no longer stiff with uncertainty. She even smiled, a small, genuine smile that made Daniel's heart lift. For a moment, the weight of her past seemed to vanish, and she was simply enjoying herself. When the song ended, they paused, lingering in the quiet moment that followed. Daniel's hand remained lightly on Amira's waist as he gazed down at her, his mind swimming with unspoken thoughts. There was something different about the way he looked at her now, something more profound than before. "You're a natural," Daniel said with a grin, breaking the silence. Amira chuckled softly. "I don't know about that, but I didn't trip, so I guess that's a win." "Definitely a win," Daniel replied, his smile widening. They walked off the dance floor together, returning to their table. The lightness of the dance lingered between them, and for the first time that evening, Daniel felt like he could truly enjoy himself. He had spent so much of the evening worrying about how people would react, how Claire would feel, and what judgments would be cast. But now all of that seemed distant and unimportant. As they sat back down, Amira's eyes drifted over the crowd again, this time with a bit more confidence. She wasn't hiding anymore, and Daniel noticed that the subtle tension in her posture had eased. She looked content. "I still can't believe I'm here," Amira admitted quietly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Dancing at a wedding, wearing a dress like this, it doesn't feel real." "It's real," Daniel said gently. "You deserve to be here, Amira, just as much as anyone else." Amira's gaze softened as she looked at him. "I'm not used to hearing that," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of struggle. "I'm not sure why," Daniel replied. "You're incredible. More people should see that." Amira smiled, though there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "Maybe, but it's hard to feel that way when life keeps telling you otherwise." Daniel wanted to say more, to reassure her, but before he could, a familiar voice interrupted them. Well, Daniel, you've certainly surprised us all tonight." Daniel looked up to see Evan, another old friend from his social circle, approaching their table. Evan, with his perfectly tailored suit and self-assured smirk, had always been the type to make an entrance. He was followed closely by his wife, Lauren, who looked equally polished and intrigued. "Evan," Daniel greeted, his tone polite but cautious. "Good to see you." Evan's eyes flicked to Amira, and though his expression remained friendly, there was an unmistakable curiosity in his gaze. "And who is this lovely lady?" "This is Amira," Daniel said smoothly, his voice firm. "She's my guest." Amira offered a polite smile, but Daniel could sense the tension returning to her shoulders. She was bracing herself for the inevitable scrutiny. Evan raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. "Amira, it's a pleasure to meet you. You've certainly caused quite the stir tonight." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but before he could respond, Lauren chimed in, her tone more genuine than her husband's. "You look absolutely stunning, Amira," she said with a warm smile. "That dress is beautiful." "Thank you," Amira replied, her voice soft but appreciative. Evan, sensing that the conversation might be heading in a more awkward direction, chuckled and waved his hand dismissively. "Well, I won't keep you," he said, though his eyes lingered on Daniel for a moment longer. "Enjoy the evening, you two." As they walked away, Daniel let out a small sigh, turning back to Amira. "Sorry about that." "It's fine," Amira said, though she looked thoughtful. "I expected people to be curious." "Curious is one way to put it," Daniel muttered, shaking his head. "You handled it well, though." Amira smiled faintly. "I've had a lot of practice dealing with judgment." Daniel looked at her, his expression softening. He was beginning to realize just how much strength it took for Amira to be here, to put herself in this situation, knowing full well that she would be scrutinized by people who didn't know anything about her. And yet she was handling it with grace. The evening continued, and the initial buzz of curiosity surrounding Amira began to die down. The guests returned to their own conversations and activities, leaving Daniel and Amira to enjoy the rest of the event in relative peace. They talked more, sharing stories about their lives, Daniel about his business and the pressure that came with it, and Amira about her past, her love for teaching, and the twists of fate that had led her to where she was now. As the night wore on, Daniel found himself more and more drawn to Amira. What had started as an impulsive decision to bring her to the wedding was quickly becoming something far more meaningful. He admired her resilience, her quiet strength, and the way she carried herself despite everything she had been through. And as they talked, he realized that he didn't just see her as a guest anymore. He saw her as someone he truly wanted to know. Amira, for her part, found herself opening up to Daniel in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. There was something about him that made her feel safe, like she could be herself without fear of judgment. She had expected to feel out of place here, but Daniel's presence had made her feel welcome, like she belonged. By the time the evening began to wind down, the guests were starting to leave, the energy of the room shifting as the festivities came to a close. Daniel and Amira stayed a little longer, enjoying the quiet that came with the dwindling crowd. As they sat together, Daniel glanced over at Claire, who was still mingling with the last of the guests. She hadn't approached him again, but he could sense that she had been watching him throughout the night. There was something about the way she had looked at him earlier, something that made him feel like he had finally moved on from their relationship. For the first time, Daniel felt a sense of peace when it came to Claire. He had spent so long holding on to the past, wondering what could have been, but now, sitting here with Amira, he realized that he was ready to let go. Claire was happy, and so was he, in a way he hadn't expected. Amira, noticing the shift in his mood, glanced at him curiously. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly. Daniel smiled, shaking his head. "Just thinking about how much has changed." "Good changes?" Amira asked, her eyes gentle. "Yeah," Daniel replied, his gaze meeting hers. "Good changes." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the evening settling over them. It had been a night full of unexpected moments, but somehow it all felt right. As the evening continued to wind down, Daniel felt a sense of calm wash over him. He hadn't expected the night to unfold the way it had. What had started as a plan to avoid going to his ex's wedding alone had transformed into something much deeper. His connection with Amira was growing, and the more time he spent with her, the more he realized how much he admired her resilience, her warmth, and her quiet strength. The remaining guests were slowly trickling out, and the once lively reception hall was now filled with the soft sounds of conversations winding down. Daniel glanced at Amira, who was sitting beside him, quietly observing the scene around her. She had handled everything remarkably well, from the curious glances to the subtle judgment of some of the guests. But there was something more about her that had begun to capture his attention. She wasn't just someone he had brought along to avoid feeling lonely. She was someone who had made an unexpected impact on him. "Ready to head out?" Daniel asked softly, leaning toward her. Amira looked at him, her expression thoughtful before she nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." They stood up, and as they began to make their way toward the exit, Daniel couldn't help but notice how natural it felt to walk beside her. There was no longer any awkwardness or hesitation between them, just a sense of ease that had grown over the course of the evening. As they stepped outside, the cool night air hit them, and Amira took a deep breath, seemingly relieved to be out of the grandeur of the wedding venue. The city lights sparkled in the distance, casting a soft glow over the streets as they walked down the driveway toward the car waiting for them. "That was quite the experience," Amira said with a small laugh, breaking the silence between them. Daniel chuckled, glancing over at her. "Yeah, I'd say it was. How are you feeling?" Amira shrugged, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "It was strange, but I think I'm okay. I mean, it was a little overwhelming at first, but I don't regret coming." "I'm glad you came," Daniel said sincerely. "I know it wasn't easy, but you handled everything perfectly." Amira smiled, though there was a touch of humility in her expression. "I'm not sure I handled it perfectly, but thank you. I think you made it easier." They reached the car, and Daniel opened the door for her, letting her slide into the back seat before joining her. As the car pulled away from the venue, the silence between them was comfortable, and for the first time that night, Daniel felt like he could breathe freely. He hadn't realized how much tension he had been carrying, tension over seeing Claire, over how the evening would go, but now, all of that had melted away. The car ride back to the city was quiet, but not in an awkward way. Daniel and Amira shared occasional glances and soft smiles, both of them seemingly lost in their own thoughts. The connection between them felt stronger now, more genuine. And Daniel found himself wanting to know more about her. Not just the surface details, but the deeper layers of who she was. After a while, Amira broke the silence. "You know, I've been thinking about something," she said, her voice soft but contemplative. "What's that?" Daniel asked, turning slightly to face her. Amira hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. When you asked me to come to the wedding, I wasn't sure what to expect. Part of me thought you were just looking for someone to fill a space, someone to make things less awkward for you. Daniel's brow furrowed slightly as he listened, his attention fully on her. But after tonight, I feel like it was more than that, Amira continued. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but it feels like this evening wasn't just about your ex. It feels like it was about something else. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he realized where the conversation was heading. He hadn't fully processed his own feelings until this moment, but hearing Amira put it into words made everything clearer. You're right, Daniel said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. At first, I thought I was just trying to avoid feeling lonely at the wedding. But the more I got to know you, the more I realized that this wasn't just about that. It was about you. I didn't expect to feel this way, but here we are. Amira's eyes softened as she looked at him, her expression filled with a mixture of surprise and understanding. I guess we both didn't expect this, she said with a small smile. Daniel smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. No, we didn't. But I'm glad it happened. The rest of the car ride passed in comfortable silence, both of them processing the quiet shift in their relationship. By the time they reached Daniel's apartment building, the mood between them had changed. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if they both knew that this was the beginning of something new. When they arrived at the building, Daniel helped Amira out of the car, and they stood together for a moment on the sidewalk, neither of them quite ready to say goodnight. Do you want to come up for a bit? Daniel asked, his voice tentative but hopeful. Amira hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his as if she was considering something deeply. Then, with a soft smile, she nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. They walked into the building together, the silence between them now filled with an unspoken understanding. Whatever had started as a simple gesture of kindness had evolved into something far more meaningful. And as they stepped into the elevator, Daniel realized that this night, this seemingly ordinary wedding, had changed everything. They stepped into the elevator, and as the doors closed, the quiet hum of the machinery filled the space. Daniel stood beside Amira, the close proximity between them feeling different now. It wasn't just the afterglow of a successful evening. It was the lingering sense of something deeper, something unspoken that had formed between them. Neither of them said anything, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like both of them were absorbing the weight of the day, processing the unexpected turns that had brought them here. When the elevator doors opened, Daniel led Amira down the hallway to his apartment. He unlocked the door and held it open for her. She stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the soft lighting in his modern, minimalist living space. The contrast between the warmth of the evening's events and the cool, sleek moments of his apartment wasn't lost on either of them. Make yourself at home, Daniel said, gesturing to the couch as he walked toward the kitchen. Can I get you something to drink? Tea? Water? Water would be great, thanks, Amira replied, walking slowly into the living room. She stood for a moment, taking in the spacious apartment. It was pristine, with large windows that looked out over the glittering city below. She couldn't help but feel a sense of surrealism, being here, in this place. Just a few days ago, she had been sitting on a sidewalk trying to figure out what her next move in life would be. Now she was standing in the apartment of a man she barely knew, yet felt oddly connected to. Daniel returned with 2 glasses of water and handed one to Amira, who took it gratefully. She sat down on the couch, sinking into the soft cushions, while Daniel sat beside her. For a few moments, they sipped their drinks in silence, the unspoken tension between them growing stronger. Tonight was unexpected, Amira said softly, breaking the silence. She set her glass down on the coffee table in front of her, her eyes focused on the city lights beyond the windows. I didn't think I'd feel so welcome, I guess, but you made it feel easy. Daniel set his glass down as well and turned slightly to face her. I'm glad you felt that way, he said quietly. I wanted tonight to be more than just about making appearances. I wanted it to be something real. Amira looked at him, her expression thoughtful. It felt real, she said after a moment, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you. Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Daniel felt his heart race slightly, unsure of how to respond. There was a vulnerability in Amira's voice that resonated with him, and he realized just how much he valued her presence in his life, even if they had only just met. I've spent so much time chasing things that I thought mattered, Daniel admitted, his voice low. Success, recognition, building a life that looked perfect on the outside. But tonight made me realize that maybe I've been looking for the wrong things. Amira tilted her head slightly, her eyes searching his face. What do you mean? Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. I've always thought that if I could just reach a certain level of success, everything else would fall into place. But I think I've been missing something more important. Connection, understanding, the things that really make life meaningful. Amira's gaze softened as she listened. I get that, she said quietly. I spent a lot of time thinking about what I lost. My job, my home, my security. But being out there, struggling, it made me realize that the most important things aren't what we have. It's who we are and how we treat the people around us. Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sense of agreement with her words. There was something about Amira's perspective that grounded him, that reminded him of what truly mattered. She had faced so many challenges, yet she hadn't let those experiences harden her. Instead, they had made her stronger, more compassionate. I guess what I'm trying to say, Daniel continued, his voice quieter now, is that tonight felt different because of you. I didn't just invite you to the wedding to fill a seat. I asked you to come because I felt like there was something special about you, and I wanted to get to know you better. Amira's eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and warmth. I wasn't sure if that was the case at first, she admitted. I thought maybe I was just a distraction. But the more we talked tonight, the more I realized that you were being sincere, and that means a lot to me. Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. I was being sincere, he said, and I still am. I don't know where this is going, but I want to figure it out with you. Amira smiled softly, her eyes shining with a quiet gratitude. I'd like that. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their words settling between them. The connection they had formed was undeniable now, and it felt as though the uncertainty that had hung over them at the beginning of the evening had transformed into something much more solid. After a while, Daniel spoke again, his tone lighter. So, what's next for you? He asked. Now that you've made your debut in high society, he added with a playful grin. Amira laughed softly, shaking her head. I think I'll leave the high society stuff to you, she said. As for me, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure things out. But tonight gave me a little more hope, I guess. Hope's a good place to start, Daniel said. And if you ever need anything, help, support, whatever it is, I want you to know that I'm here. Amira's smile widened. Thank you, Daniel. That means more than you know. They stayed like that for a while longer, talking quietly about their lives, their pasts, and the uncertain futures that lay ahead. The more they spoke, the more Daniel realized just how much he enjoyed being around her. There was a sense of ease between them, a natural chemistry that made everything feel effortless. Eventually, the late hour began to catch up with them, and Daniel could see that Amira was starting to get tired. I should probably get going, Amira said, stifling a small yawn. It's been a long day. Daniel nodded, though he was reluctant to see her go. Yeah, of course. I'll call you a car. As he stood up to make the arrangements, Amira followed him to the door. There was a sense of finality to the evening now, but also a quiet understanding that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something new. When the car arrived, Daniel walked Amira downstairs, holding the door open for her as she slid into the back seat. She turned to look at him one last time before the car pulled away. Thanks for everything, Daniel, she said, her voice warm and sincere. Thank you, Daniel replied, his smile reflecting the gratitude he felt. As the car drove off into the night, Daniel stood on the sidewalk, watching until it disappeared around the corner. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt optimistic about where things might go. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a strange mixture of anticipation and contentment. His mind kept drifting back to the night before, replaying moments of the wedding, the conversations with Amira, and the connection they had shared. It had all felt so surreal, yet so natural at the same time. He had gone to the wedding, expecting a challenging night filled with awkwardness and nostalgia, but it had turned into something far more meaningful. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the large windows of his apartment, gazing out at the city below. For the first time in a long time, his thoughts weren't consumed with work or the stress of his company. Instead, he found himself thinking about Amira, her quiet strength, her resilience, and the way she had navigated a world that was so far removed from her own. He wondered what she was doing now, whether she was thinking about him too. Part of him wanted to reach out immediately, to check in and see how she was feeling after the whirlwind of the previous night. But another part of him hesitated, not wanting to rush anything or seem too eager. He had never been in this position before, genuinely interested in someone, but unsure of where things were headed. As he sipped his coffee, his phone buzzed on the counter. He set the cup down and picked up the phone, his heart skipping a beat when he saw Amira's name flash across the screen. It was a text message. Amira. Hey, Daniel. Just wanted to say thank you again for last night. It was something I'll never forget. Mm. Daniel smiled as he read the message, feeling a warm rush of emotion. He quickly typed out a response when met. Daniel. It was my pleasure. I'm really glad you came. How are you feeling today? There was a brief pause before his phone buzzed again. Amira. Honestly, I'm still processing everything. It felt like I stepped into a different world for a night. But I'm good. You? Daniel leaned against the counter, thinking about how to respond. There was so much he wanted to say, but he didn't want to overwhelm her. Daniel. Same here. It was definitely a different world, but having you there made it better. I was just thinking about you actually. So, he hit send before he could overthink it, and almost immediately regretted it. He worried that he might have come on too strong, but before he could dwell on it for too long, her response came. Amira, you were thinking about me? Daniel smiled, his heart lifting as he read her words. He could sense the playfulness in her message, and it made him relax. Daniel, yeah, I was. I guess last night had more of an impact on me than I expected. This time, her response took a little longer, and Daniel found himself staring at his phone, waiting for the 3 dots to appear, signaling that she was typing. Finally, her message came through. Amira, I wasn't sure what to expect when I agreed to go, but I'm really glad I did. You're different, Daniel, in a good way. Daniel's breath caught as he read the words. He wasn't sure why, but hearing that from her meant more than he could have anticipated. He quickly typed out a reply. Daniel, that means a lot to me, Amira. I'd love to see you again, if you're up for it. He sent the message and waited, the seconds stretching out like minutes as he stared at the screen. He wasn't used to feeling this nervous, but there was something about Amira that made him care about what happened next. Finally, her response came. Amira, I'd like that too. When were you thinking? Daniel exhaled, relieved that she was on the same page. Daniel, how about this weekend? We could do something low-key, maybe grab lunch or go for a walk. There was a short pause before she replied. Amira, that sounds nice. I'm free this weekend, so let's do it. Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of excitement building within him. Daniel, great. I'll text you the details later. With the conversation settled, Daniel put his phone down and felt the tension leave his body. He hadn't realized how much he had wanted to see her again until this moment. The idea of spending more time with her, outside of the chaos of the wedding, filled him with a sense of anticipation. The rest of the day passed quickly, his mind drifting in and out of thoughts of Amira as he went about his usual routine. Work calls, emails, and meetings filled the hours, but underneath it all was the growing sense of curiosity about what the weekend would bring. When Saturday finally arrived, Daniel found himself pacing around his apartment, mentally preparing for the day ahead. He had chosen a small cafe near the park for their lunch, a cozy, quiet spot where they could talk and relax without the pressure of formalities. He wanted to make sure Amira felt comfortable, especially after the intensity of the wedding. He arrived at the cafe early, his nerves tingling with anticipation. He chose a table by the window, giving him a clear view of the street so he could see her when she arrived. The minutes ticked by, and just as he started to feel the familiar twinge of nervousness, he saw her walking toward the cafe. Amira looked different today, more relaxed, more herself. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair tied back, and she carried an air of quiet confidence that Daniel found captivating. As she stepped into the cafe and spotted him, she smiled, and the warmth of her expression instantly put him at ease. Hey, Daniel said as she approached the table. You look great. Amira blushed slightly, her smile widening. Thanks, so do you. They sat down, and for a few moments, the conversation was light and easy as they discussed the cafe, the weather, and their week. But soon the deeper connection that had formed between them at the wedding began to resurface, and their conversation turned to more personal topics. I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night, Daniel said, his voice quiet as he sipped his coffee. About how you've been through so much, but you've stayed kind and hopeful. That really stuck with me. Amira's expression softened as she looked at him. It wasn't easy, she admitted. There were times when I wanted to give up, when it felt like the world was just too hard. But then I realized that giving up would mean losing who I am, and I didn't want that. Daniel nodded, feeling a deep sense of respect for her. I admire that about you. You're stronger than most people I know. Amira smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. I guess when life knocks you down enough times, you either get up or stay down. I chose to get up. They continued talking, sharing stories about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. With each passing moment, Daniel felt himself drawn closer to Amira, not just because of her strength, but because of the way she saw the world. She didn't let her circumstances define her, and that was something he admired deeply. As the lunch came to an end, Daniel realized that he didn't want this to be the last time they saw each other. There was so much more he wanted to know about her, so much more he wanted to experience with her. "Would you like to go for a walk?" Daniel asked, glancing out the window at the park nearby. "It's a nice day and we don't have to end this just yet." Amira looked at him, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I'd love that." Daniel and Amira left the cafe and strolled toward the nearby park, their footsteps in sync as they walked side by side. The day was warm and bright, with the sun filtering through the trees and casting dappled light onto the path ahead of them. The park was alive with the sounds of children playing, birds chirping, and the soft murmur of people enjoying the afternoon. It felt peaceful, a stark contrast to the intensity of the wedding night they had shared. As they walked, Daniel couldn't help but steal glances at Amira. There was something about her presence that made him feel grounded, more connected to himself than he had felt in a long time. She wasn't flashy, wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just herself, and that was more than enough. "So," Amira said, breaking the comfortable silence, "this is definitely a change of pace from the wedding." Daniel laughed softly. "Yeah, a bit more low-key, but I figured after that whole ordeal, something simple would be nice." "It's perfect, Nitam," Amira said, her voice light and sincere. "I think I've had enough of high society for a while." They continued walking, weaving through the park's winding paths. After a while, they found a bench under a large oak tree and sat down, watching as people passed by, lost in their own worlds. For a few moments, they sat in silence, both of them content to just be in each other's company. "You know," Daniel began, his tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking a lot about what's next for me. After the wedding, after seeing Claire with someone else, I realized that I've been stuck in the past for too long." Amira glanced at him, her brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've spent so much time focusing on what I thought I lost. Claire, the relationship we had, the future I thought we'd build together. But seeing her happy, moving on with her life, it made me realize that maybe I've been holding on to something that wasn't right for me in the first place." Amira listened quietly, her gaze soft but attentive. "For a long time, I thought that success and the perfect relationship would bring me happiness," Daniel continued. "But now I'm starting to see that maybe I've been looking for the wrong things. And maybe what I need isn't about status or appearances. Maybe it's about connection, real connection." Amira nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's hard to let go of what we think we need, especially when we've spent so much time building our lives around it. But sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward." Daniel smiled, grateful for her insight. "You're right. I think I've been afraid to admit that to myself. But meeting you, it's made me rethink a lot of things. You've been through so much, but you haven't let it break you. And I admire that more than you know." Amira smiled, though there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm as strong as you think I am. There were plenty of times when I wanted to give up, when I thought I couldn't keep going. But you did keep going," Daniel said gently, "and that's what matters." They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the park filling the space between them. There was a comfort in their quiet, a sense that they didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. They were simply present with each other. And that was enough. After a few minutes, Amira spoke again, her voice soft. "You asked me what's next for me, but the truth is, I don't really know. I've spent so much time just trying to survive, day by day, that I haven't had the chance to think about the future. I used to have dreams, you know. I wanted to be a teacher, to make a difference in the lives of kids who needed someone to believe in them. But that dream feels so far away now." Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. "Why does it feel far away? You're still the same person, Amira. The circumstances might have changed, but your ability to make a difference hasn't." Amira shook her head slightly, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "It's hard to see that sometimes. When life knocks you down so many times, it's easy to forget who you are." Daniel reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I don't think you've forgotten who you are. I think you've just had to survive for so long that you haven't had the chance to be yourself. But you're still that person, Amira. You still have that passion, that drive. And if being a teacher is what you want, there's no reason you can't get back to that." Amira looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Daniel admitted, "but it's possible. And I want to help you, if you'll let me, Amira's breath caught in her throat, the sincerity in Daniel's voice overwhelming her. For so long she had been on her own, fighting to stay afloat in a world that seemed determined to keep her down. She hadn't let herself believe that anyone could truly care about her, much less want to help her. But here was Daniel, offering her the kind of support she had long since stopped expecting. "Why are you doing this?" Amira asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you care so much?" Daniel hesitated, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. He hadn't expected to feel this way so soon, but the connection he had with Amira was undeniable. She had touched something deep inside him, something that made him want to be a better person. Not for appearances, not for status, but because he genuinely wanted to see her happy. "I care because you're worth caring about," Daniel said finally, his voice steady and sure. "I don't know what's going to happen between us, but I know that I want to be there for you. I want to see you succeed. You deserve that." Amira's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She hadn't expected any of this, hadn't expected to meet someone like Daniel, hadn't expected to feel this way again. But here they were, sitting in a park, their lives intertwined in ways she hadn't thought possible. "Thank you," Amira whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what else to say." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel replied softly. "Just know that I'm here, and whatever you decide to do next, I'll be here to support you." For the first time in a long while, Amira allowed herself to believe that things could get better, that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a brighter future. And as she sat there holding Daniel's hand, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, something warm and promising. As they sat together in the park, Amira felt the warmth of hope bloom in her chest, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to embrace in years. It was new, fragile, but undeniably present. She looked at Daniel and realized how much their chance encounter had already changed her. For so long, she had been surviving, just getting through each day without expecting anything more. Now, sitting here with him, it felt like her life had opened up in ways she hadn't thought possible. "Have you always been this thoughtful?" Amira asked, half joking, though there was a serious undertone to her words. "I mean, I can't imagine many people in your world offering the kind of support you have." Daniel chuckled softly, leaning back against the bench. "I don't know. I think for a long time I was too focused on myself. My business, my success, my image. But lately, especially after meeting you, I've realized there's more to life than just climbing the ladder. I've been thinking a lot about what really matters." Amira smiled, touched by his honesty. "I think it's brave, actually, being willing to rethink your life like that." "Brave?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "I don't know if I'd call it brave. It just feels necessary. Like I've been missing something, and now I'm finally starting to figure out what it is." Amira nodded, her heart warming at his words. "Well, it takes courage to admit when you've been focusing on the wrong things. Most people don't want to face that. They'd rather keep going, even if it makes them unhappy." Daniel turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "What about you? Do you think you've been focusing on the wrong things?" Amira paused, considering his question. "I think I've been so focused on surviving that I haven't allowed myself to think about anything else. I've been stuck in this mindset of just getting through the day, you know? And when you're in that place, it's hard to imagine anything beyond the immediate struggle." Daniel nodded, understanding. "That makes sense, but now," Amira smiled softly, "now, I don't know. For the first time in a long time, I feel like there might be more to life than just surviving. I'm starting to think that maybe I could have a future again, something to look forward to." Daniel reached out and gently took her hand again, his touch reassuring. "You do have a future, Amira, and it's going to be brighter than you think." She looked at him, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. There was something about the way he said it that made her believe him, even though the path ahead still felt uncertain. "Maybe," Amira said, her voice quiet. "I hope so." They sat in silence for a few more moments, watching the park around them. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden light over everything. It felt peaceful, like the world was slowing down for them, giving them space to breathe and think. Eventually, Daniel broke the silence, his tone light. "You know, I've been thinking, if you're interested, I could help you get back into teaching." Amira blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I have connections in the city," Daniel said with a shrug. "There are schools, organizations, places that could use someone like you. If that's something you still want, I'd be happy to help you get your foot in the door." Amira stared at him, her mind racing. The idea of teaching again, of returning to the career she had loved and lost, felt almost too good to be true. She had pushed those dreams aside for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to even consider them as possibilities. But now, here was Daniel, offering her a way back in. "You'd really do that?" Amira asked, her voice filled with both hope and hesitation. "Of course," Daniel replied, his smile genuine. "You're a talented, caring person, Amira. I know that whatever you do, you'll make a difference. And if teaching is what you want, then I want to help you get there." Amira felt a lump form in her throat, the weight of his kindness overwhelming her. She had spent so long feeling invisible, like no one truly saw her or cared about her dreams. And now, here was someone who not only saw her, but believed in her potential. "I don't know what to say," Amira whispered, her eyes filling with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," Daniel said gently. "Just know that you're not alone in this. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Amira smiled through the tears that threatened to spill over. "Thank you, Daniel. You have no idea how much this means to me." Daniel squeezed her hand lightly, his own smile warm and reassuring. "You don't have to thank me, Amira. I'm just glad I can be here for you." For a moment, they sat together in silence, the connection between them stronger than ever. Amira felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years, a belief that maybe, just maybe, her life could be more than the struggle it had been. After a while, Amira's smile returned, brighter this time. "You know, you're making it really hard for me to go back to my old life," she teased, her tone light. Daniel laughed, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Good, that's the plan." They both laughed, the sound of their shared joy filling the space around them. It felt easy, natural, as if they had known each other far longer than just a few days. There was something undeniable between them, a connection that had grown unexpectedly, but now felt like it had always been there. As the sun continued to sink lower, casting long shadows across the park, Daniel glanced at Amira with a playful smile. "How about we keep walking? I'm not ready for this day to end yet." Amira grinned, her eyes lighting up. "Neither am I." They stood up hand in hand and continued their walk through the park. The path stretched ahead of them, filled with possibility and promise. And for the first time in a long time, Amira felt like she was walking towards something real, something meaningful. Together they walked into the evening, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the park, their connection growing stronger with every step. The future, once a distant and uncertain concept, now felt within reach. And for both of them, it was a future they were ready to embrace, together. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of change. Daniel and Amira spent more time together, and with each passing day, their bond deepened. What had started as a chance encounter had quickly evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. They had shared countless conversations about life, dreams, and the uncertainties they both faced. But more than that, they had shared a sense of understanding, a connection that transcended the surface level. Daniel found himself looking forward to their time together, whether it was a simple lunch, a walk through the city, or late-night talks on the phone. Amira had become a constant presence in his life, and he realized just how much he enjoyed being around her. There was something refreshing about her honesty, her lack of pretense. She wasn't trying to impress him or fit into his world. She was just herself, and that was more than enough. For Amira, the transformation was even more profound. She had spent so long feeling like she was stuck in survival mode, but now, for the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward. Daniel's support had given her the confidence to pursue her dreams again, and with his help, she had begun looking into teaching positions. It was a slow process, but it was progress, and that was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. One afternoon, as they sat together in a small cafe downtown, Amira looked across the table at Daniel, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she began, her voice soft, "I don't think I ever really thanked you for everything you've done for me." Daniel looked up from his coffee, surprised. "You don't have to thank me, Amira. I'm just glad I could help." Amira shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "No, I mean it. You've done more than just help. You've given me hope again. I don't think I even realized how much I needed that until you came into my life." Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. "You've always had that hope inside you, Amira. I didn't put it there. I just reminded you that it was still there." Amira smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "Either way, I'm grateful." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the sounds of the cafe buzzing softly around them. Daniel glanced out the window, watching the people pass by, before turning back to Amira with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," Daniel began, his tone casual, though there was a hint of seriousness in his eyes. "What if you didn't have to go through all of this alone? What if We did this together. Amira's brow furrowed slightly, confusion flickering across her face. What do you mean? I mean, I want to be there for you, Amira, Daniel said, his voice steady. Not just as someone who helps you find a job or figure out what's next, but as someone who's with you for the long haul. I care about you, more than I think I even realized, and I don't want to keep pretending that what we have is just a casual friendship. Amira's heart skipped a beat as she processed his words. She had felt the same connection, the same pull toward him, but she hadn't expected him to say it out loud, not yet. Daniel, Amira hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Her mind raced with a mix of emotions, excitement, fear, hope. She had grown so used to being on her own that the idea of someone wanting to share her life, to be there for her in such a real way, felt almost overwhelming. I know this is a lot, Daniel said gently, sensing her hesitation. And I don't expect an answer right away. I wanted to be honest with you. Because what we have, it's not just something casual to me. It's important. Amira looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had spent so long building walls around herself, keeping people at a distance to avoid getting hurt. But with Daniel, those walls had started to crumble. She hadn't expected it, hadn't planned for it, but it had happened nonetheless. I care about you too, Amira said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I thought I would. Daniel smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. Good, he said, his tone light but sincere. Because I want to see where this goes, Amira. I want to be there for you, not just as someone who helps you with your career, but as someone who's in this with you. Amira felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly brushed it away, laughing softly at her own reaction. I wasn't expecting this, she admitted, but I think I want that too. Daniel reached across the table and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. We don't have to rush anything, he said, his voice soft. We'll take it one step at a time. Amira nodded, her heart full. One step at a time, she echoed. They sat there for a while longer, their hands intertwined, the weight of their words settling between them. It was a quiet, intimate moment, one that neither of them had expected, but that both of them welcomed. The future still held uncertainties, but for the first time in a long time, they both felt ready to face it. Together, as they left the cafe and walked through the city, hand in hand, the world around them seemed to fade into the background. It didn't matter what challenges lay ahead or what obstacles they might face. What mattered was that they had found each other, and that was enough. The weeks following that heartfelt conversation in the cafe felt like a dream for both Daniel and Amira. Their connection deepened, and what had begun as a chance encounter transformed into a genuine relationship. They spent more time together, each new experience strengthening their bond. Daniel found himself looking forward to every moment with Amira, whether it was a quiet evening walk, a long conversation over dinner, or simply sitting together, enjoying each other's presence. Amira, for her part, found herself allowing hope to blossom fully. For so long, she had been cautious, afraid to believe that life could offer her anything more than what she had already endured. But with Daniel, things felt different. He didn't just offer her support. He believed in her, and that belief gave her the courage to start believing in herself again. One Saturday afternoon, they decided to take a day trip out of the city. Daniel had suggested a small town not far from where he grew up, a place with rolling hills, quiet streets, and a cozy, hidden cafe that he loved. Amira agreed enthusiastically, excited to see a new side of Daniel and to escape the bustle of the city for a while. As they drove through the countryside, the scenery shifting from the towering skyscrapers of the city to open fields and lush greenery, Amira leaned back in her seat and smiled. She hadn't felt this at peace in a long time. The conversation flowed easily between them, filled with laughter, light teasing, and quiet moments of reflection. When they arrived at the town, Daniel parked the car near the town square, where a small farmer's market was in full swing. The streets were lined with stalls selling fresh produce, homemade crafts, and local delicacies. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and the sound of people chatting and children laughing. This place is beautiful, Amira said as they stepped out of the car. It feels like we've stepped into a different world. Daniel smiled, watching her take it all in. I thought you'd like it. It's one of my favorite places to come when I need to clear my head. They wandered through the market, stopping at different stalls to admire the goods on display. Amira was particularly drawn to a stand selling hand-carved wooden trinkets, and Daniel couldn't help but smile as she picked up a small, intricately designed pendant and turned it over in her hands. It's beautiful, she said softly, her fingers tracing the delicate carvings. "It reminds me of something my grandmother used to have." Daniel saw the look of nostalgia in her eyes and gently took the pendant from her hand. "Then it's yours," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I want you to have it." Amira blinked, surprised. "You don't have to do that, Daniel." "I know I don't," he said with a grin, "but I want to. Besides, it suits you." She hesitated for a moment, but then smiled and accepted the gift, her heart swelling with warmth. "Thank you," she said softly, slipping the pendant into her bag. They continued to explore the market, laughing as they tasted samples of homemade jams and sweets, and taking in the sights and sounds of the quaint little town. The day felt perfect, simple, relaxed, and filled with moments of joy. Eventually, they made their way to the cafe Daniel had mentioned earlier, a cozy spot tucked away on a quiet street corner. The walls were lined with shelves of old books, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air. They found a table by the window where they could watch the world go by as they sipped their drinks and shared a plate of pastries. As they sat together, the conversation turned to more serious topics: Amira's future, her dreams, and the possibilities that lay ahead. "I've been thinking about what you said," Amira began, her voice quiet but thoughtful. "About teaching again." Daniel looked at her, his expression encouraging. And I think I wanted to do it," Amira said, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I've been looking at different programs and schools. It's still a long road ahead, but I'm ready to start." Daniel's eyes lit up with pride. "That's amazing, Amira. I knew you could do it." Amira laughed softly. "I'm not there yet, but I'm excited. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what's next." "You should be," Daniel said, his voice full of warmth. "You're going to make an incredible teacher. I have no doubt about that." Amira felt her heart swell with gratitude and hope. "It's funny," she said after a moment. "I never thought my life would take this turn. I mean, just a few months ago, I was struggling to get by. And now I'm sitting here, talking about my future like it's something I can actually look forward to." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand, his touch reassuring. "That's because you're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Amira. You've come so far, and you deserve every bit of happiness that's coming your way." Amira smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know what I did to deserve you, Daniel. You deserve someone who sees you for who you are," Daniel said softly. "And I'm just lucky enough to be that person." They sat there for a while longer, talking and laughing, savoring the quiet intimacy that had grown between them. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm glow over the town as they finally left the cafe and walked back to the car. On the drive back to the city, the conversation was light, filled with laughter and shared memories of the day. But as the city skyline came into view, Amira felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't just returning to her old life, she was moving forward, stepping into a future that felt bright and full of possibility. As they pulled up to her apartment building, Daniel parked the car and turned to face her. "Today was perfect," he said, his voice sincere. Amira smiled, her heart full. "It really was." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Daniel spoke again, his tone more serious. "Amira, I just want you to know, whatever happens, I'm here for you. You don't have to do any of this alone." Amira looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I know," she said softly, "and that means more to me than you'll ever know." She leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, her touch lingering for a moment before she pulled back. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered. Daniel smiled, his heart racing. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad you're letting me be a part of your life." With that, Amira stepped out of the car and waved goodbye, her heart light as she walked up to her apartment. As she opened the door and stepped inside, she couldn't help but smile to herself. Life had a funny way of surprising her when she least expected it, and for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The next few months were a whirlwind for Amira and Daniel, filled with milestones both personal and professional. Amira's hard work paid off when she was offered a position as a teacher at a local school, a dream she had thought was long out of reach. The offer came after several interviews, and though she had been nervous at every step, she had Daniel's unwavering support to guide her through. On the day she received the job offer, Amira couldn't contain her excitement and she called Daniel immediately, her voice trembling with joy as she told him the news. "I got the job, Daniel. I'm going to be a teacher," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of disbelief and elation. Daniel, who had been waiting for the call all day, felt a surge of pride as he listened to her. "I knew you'd get it, Amira. I'm so proud of you." They celebrated that evening at Daniel's apartment, where he surprised her with a bottle of champagne and a home-cooked dinner. They toasted to her new career, to the future, and to the journey they had shared so far. "I couldn't have done this without you," Amira said, her eyes shining as she raised her glass. Daniel shook his head, smiling warmly. "You did this, Amira. I just reminded you of what you were capable of." As they clinked their glasses together, Amira felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the job, but for everything that had led her to this moment. Daniel had come into her life when she had least expected it, and now they were building something beautiful together. Over the next few weeks, Amira settled into her new role as a teacher. The first few days were a whirlwind of learning names, lesson plans, and navigating the challenges of the classroom, but she loved every moment of it. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Daniel, too, found a renewed sense of purpose in his life. His business was thriving, but more than that, he had found a balance between his professional and personal life that he hadn't known was possible. He spent more time with Amira, and their relationship deepened with each passing day. One weekend, as they sat together in a park, one of their favorite places to unwind, Amira reflected on how much had changed. "I feel like everything is finally falling into place," she said, her voice soft as she leaned against Daniel's shoulder. "I never thought I'd get here." Daniel smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "You've worked hard for this, Amira. You deserve all the happiness in the world." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "So do you, Daniel." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play nearby and the soft breeze rustling the leaves in the trees. There was a sense of peace between them, a feeling that the case of their past had finally given way to something steady and strong. As they watched the sun begin to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Daniel turned to Amira with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "about us." Amira raised an eyebrow, her heart skipping a beat at the intensity in his gaze. "What about us?" Daniel paused for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. "We've been through a lot together in a short time, and I've come to realize something important. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, Amira. I don't want to imagine my life without you." Amira's breath caught in her throat as she listened, her heart pounding in her chest. "Daniel, I know it might seem soon," Daniel continued, his voice softening, "but I love you, Amira, and I want to build a life with you. Whatever that looks like, whatever the future holds, I want to face it with you by my side." Tears welled up in Amira's eyes as she listened to his words, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. She had never imagined that her life would take this turn, that she would find someone who saw her for who she truly was and loved her unconditionally. But here was Daniel, offering her exactly that. "I love you too, Daniel," Amira whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "More than I can put into words." Daniel smiled, his eyes filled with relief and joy. "Then let's do this together," he said softly. "Let's build a future, one that's full of love, hope, and all the things we've been searching for." Amira nodded, tears streaming down her face as she leaned in and kissed him, the emotion of the moment overwhelming her. They held each other close, the world around them fading as they focused on the future they would create together. From that day forward, Amira and Daniel's lives intertwined in ways they had never expected. Their love grew stronger with each passing day, and they faced the challenges of life with a newfound sense of purpose and togetherness. For Amira, life had transformed from a series of struggles into a journey filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. And for Daniel, the woman he had met by chance had become his partner, his confidant, and the love of his life. Together, they built a life filled with joy, laughter, and the knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them hand in hand. And as they walked into the future, side by side, they knew that they had found something truly extraordinary, something that would last a lifetime.